There's a scene in the famous movie Dead Poets Society where Robin Williams, the new teacher, is trying to educate a class of boys about how poetry works. And he gets one of the lads to read out this formal introduction from a textbook which describes poetry in very regimented ways, almost as though you can kind of work it out with a set of tools to work out how valuable or impressive or good the poem is. And Robin Williams, the teacher, says, excrement. He says, that's a load of rubbish. Poetry doesn't work like that. And he says, tear it out. And he asks all the boys to tear out this fallacious introduction from the poetry textbook. He says, rip it out. I want you to do poetry in a different way to that. There is something about the Christian faith that sometimes seems to fall in practice into regimented ways of doing things, formula. And I'm not sure it can be done that way. There's something about following Jesus that is much more human, much more improvised, much more tailored according to how he teaches people. It's not a set of rules in quite the same way. So as I've talked about before, following Jesus is like trying to keep on a main road behind the lead car. And that begins with simple stuff. That begins with a call, it begins with a basic following. But fairly soon, when you follow the narrative of Jesus and the 12, you realise that he inducts them into his lifestyle pretty quickly. Wherever he goes, they go. Whatever he does, they begin to watch and then join in with. So it's like moving from a fairly pedestrian small road onto a main road fairly quickly. One of the things that is extraordinary about Jesus is his desire to include and involve the guys and the travelling women into his work. So a bit like pulling onto a main road here where you don't quite know what you're going to get. You find yourself in a place where everything's moving and there's a multiple set of lanes. Maybe you got to learn how to be in these different lanes. Like commonly, those of us who are used to driving on motorways will know there's a left-hand lane, and it's the slower lane. It's the lane where all the lorries go, and then you'll have middle lanes, which to overtake the smaller vehicles. And you can move out again on a 3 or 4 lane motorway, and you can go right the way out. You can go right the way out to the lane that's fastest. All the time you're adjusting, you're signalling, you're moving in and out according to the traffic, changing lanes according to what you need to do. That's a bit of a picture of how following Jesus requires adjustment, improvisation. Wherever he goes, we need to go. This is a clip of a guy called Keith Jarrett. He's a jazz improviser. He's probably quite unique in the jazz world in that he's well known for being able to do precise classical pieces of music following the manuscript closely, but he can also do completely brand new pieces of work entirely improvised off the top of his head. this concert is one of those where he can play for something like 50 minutes at a stretch, where none of it is planned and all of it is made up. This is a beautiful picture of how human beings can start somewhere and just see where it leads them. Because he's practiced in the classical stuff and the manuscript stuff, he's able to do other things too. One feature of Jesus' life and ministry is his own ability to adapt according to what's going on around him. He can do things seasonally, he can do things in a day, he can do things in a moment where there's a change. But his ability to adapt is extraordinary. Right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, you see him called by the Holy Spirit after his baptism to spend a full 40 days in the wilderness. So it's very kind of one-dimensional for a season, where it's to do with him and God, it's to do with him and preparation. And he's very focused on that. Likewise, at the end of his life, his 3-year ministry, after his arrest, he goes into another season of being very passive. From the point of his arrest right the way through to his death, he says and does almost nothing. It just happens to him and he doesn't resist. He kind of switches off his inclination to teach, his inclination to do any of the other miraculous stuff. It all just quietens down because he chooses that season. We also have an example of Jesus improvising through a day. This happens on a handful of occasions in the different gospel accounts, where you track how his day begins and ends with him doing different things. So, for example, in Mark chapter 1, you have Jesus speaking in the context of a synagogue, and his activity is just operating in a normal religious context. He's being the main speaker, but during his talk, his presence seems to provoke someone. There's a guy who has an evil spirit and manifests in some kind of way, screeching and shouting. And so Jesus moves from teaching into exorcism, where he delivers this man of this demon. He tells the demon to go. And people are astonished. People are absolutely amazed. So he moves immediately from that synagogue context of teaching and exorcism, and he heads down and hangs out at Simon and Andrew's home in the same town, same day, where he meets Simon's mother-in-law, and she's in bed with a fever. She's sick, and Jesus rebukes the fever. So he moves from teaching to exorcism to healing, and this time it's in a very kind of domestic context where she needs some attention, and he deals with that, presumably stays for tea, I don't know. And that evening, probably because the words got out, the whole of the town has kind of gathered around Simon's back door, and Jesus comes out and has to do multiple healings all night long, really, of the whole town. So in one day you have Jesus doing teaching to exorcism to individual healing to group healing, and he just shifts from one situation to another. So there's another situation where you realize that Jesus can operate in a moment, where he can change his circumstances very quickly. Again, very familiar story. He gets a request from a guy called Jairus. Jairus is the leader of the synagogue. He says, please come to my house. My daughter is terminally ill or very ill. And so Jesus graciously just heads off to go and help this guy. Crowd following, I think. And en route, there's an interruption. There's a woman a woman who presses through the crowd. She's got her own difficulties. She's hemorrhaging and she's been sick for ages, and she reaches out, touches the hem of Jesus' garment, and boom, she experiences healing. Power flows out of Jesus, and he kind of turns around and it's like, who touched me? And he pauses. Basically, he interrupts his kind of like route to Jairus's place so he can attend to this woman and deals with her and commends her faith and then heads on. So that's another classic example of Jesus not only adjusting through a day, he can change in an instant. He can be attentive to people. It's a sign that he can be sensitive to people, he can be sensitive to the Holy Spirit, and he's absolutely content to change plans. He's open to changing lanes.
The easiest example to show it, like for anybody, when you go to a concert, every now and then it happens. The performer hypnotizes you, and you disappear.
Yeah.
You're inside those songs.
Yeah.
You know, you're not talking about those songs. You're not looking at them. You're not listening. You are inside the song. You're inside a dream. And but when it's good, it is like diving into a dream. And it's a feeling that I got for the first time when I was 18 years old, acting in Dead Poets Society. And it is a feeling, it was seconds long. I mean, it was not much, but a feeling of disappearing.
So how important is all of this improvisation, all of this inclination in Jesus to adapt? How significant is this? Is it just unique to him? Is it something that is relevant for Christians or the church more broadly? Well, we do know that there are various occasions in Acts where various key players or bit part people have to change, they have to adjust. Perhaps most famously you have Peter, Simon Peter, who had been taught by Jesus over many years that eventually Jesus would be reaching out to Gentiles as well as the Israelites, and yet Peter moves pretty slowly in terms of understanding this. It requires him to have a vision. This is after the resurrection and after the ascension. He's up on the roof of someone's house and he has a vision that persuades him that it's okay to touch or eat unclean things. And then there's a knock on the door, and it's some Gentiles from Cornelius's house who want to see Peter. And the penny drops, and it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm going to have to kind of change lanes. I'm going to have to learn how to do Gentiles. So it applies to Christians too, this changing lanes, doing something that is new or different, out of our comfort zone even, perhaps. Just back to Jesus, though, one of the things that is a definite feature of his ministry is the effectiveness and the power of what he does. When Jesus is operating, he never seems to do a one-size-fits-all. He can sometimes do probably the same material. He probably did his parables in many places over and over again. He probably did certain aspects of his teaching, Sermon on the Mount, repeatedly. But when it comes to individuals, when it comes to making connections with particular circumstances, he tailors it, and there is so much power in it that lives are changed, probably because he tailors it. In other words, his ability to improvise makes all the difference. His ability to say just the right word or do just the right action is where the power lies. It's why it's so effective. So this issue of improvising has power in it. It must be really important, therefore, for us to learn how to do it too. So just imagine Jesus choosing to train us just like he trained the 12, where over a number of months and years, many years, he teaches us to move from different lanes of experience following him, sometimes being close to him, come and being with him, sometimes being a student, watching and listening, sometimes practicing the imitation and practice lane, sometimes go and share, where we move into the fast lane and we start to do the dramatic and exciting reaching out stuff that he did. Just imagine Jesus teaching us to be confident across all those different lanes. If the imitation of Christ is a common goal for all Christians, then surely part of our ambition should be to operate like he did across the spectrum of his ministry. And maybe, like him, we will have seasons where we focus on one thing, where in a day we can move from one area to another seamlessly, or even in an instant, adjusting and adapting in a moment to suit the circumstances, so that the effectiveness and power of God is released. All of this is a high bar, but all of this is the call of God if imitation of Christ is for everyone.